Good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's webinar and podcast series, Israel Insider with Ashley Perry. I'm Stacey Roman, and I will be moderating this discussion today. We are pleased to have Mr. Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, join us here each Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern to update us on all the events going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will be giving us a briefing on current Israeli affairs for 15 minutes, then open it up for questions. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. Now, with no further ado, I'll turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Stacey, and good evening from Israel. As some of you may have heard, there's been a bit of drama this week. I'll take you through a little bit of the timeline, and then we'll look forward to what's going to happen in the next few days and maybe even months ahead. So basically, as I sort of predicted the last few weeks, if not months, that this government had days and weeks, certainly not months or years. And it was clear that it was teetering. It was clear that it would not last much longer. And the question is, what would be the impetus and who would bring it down? Now, we knew from last week that Nir Orbach had become the latest rebel, from the Yamina party, who said that he would not vote with the government. It remained to be seen exactly what that would mean. Would he vote for the dispersal of Knesset law, yes or no? There were marathon meetings on Sunday. Naftali Bennett met with him, I believe, at least 4 times. There was no press release or comments that came out of it, but it's clear that no understandings had been reached. What was understood generally was that Nir Orbach wouldn't vote for the dispersal of the Knesset law this week, but probably the week after. Another factor which seemed to play into it, at least this is what Prime Minister Naftali Bennett indicated, was that the laws governing the status of Israelis who live over the Green Line in Judea and Samaria, West Bank, as we know, at the end of this month, that law, which had to be re-legislated every 5 years, was going to run out, and the opposition were not prepared to support this law, and so the law couldn't be passed. And at the end of the month, it would be basically chaos. We went through that again a couple of weeks ago, exactly what that would mean. And Naftali Bennett claimed that it was this, that he did not want to see the country descend into chaos on a security level, on a financial level, taxation, education, health issues. All of these would have been, disastrous, and also the status of Palestinian prisoners, etc. There were lots and lots of issues tied up in this law. And basically, this was another reason why on Monday, a little bit out of the blue, Naftali Bennett decided, first of all, amongst his close advisors, then members of Yamina, and only then let his partner, alternate Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid know that he was going to declare the end of this government. And Monday afternoon or evening, the two of them held a press conference, or not really a press conference, more press briefing, where they both gave statements to the media and basically said that this government can no longer survive. It was down to ostensibly 56 because Nir Orbach made it, impossible. And as we know, that there were also rebels within Meretz and Ram, and basically nothing could get through. And it seemed just a matter of time before there'd be a dispersal of Knesset law that the opposition would be able to pass. So what basically happened is they jumped before they were pushed to a certain extent. So they called an end to this government, and today the first round, or the first round of reading of the bill to disperse the Knesset. Actually, there were 11 different bills, 9 from the opposition and 2 from the coalition, but basically they were all voted on in one bill because they were all pretty much the same. Passed by 110 with no objections. Obviously, 10 members of Knesset didn't vote or abstained or weren't there in the chamber at the time. So it's definitely started the process. The clock is now ticking. Does that mean we are definitely going to elections? The answer is no. but it seems still the most likely outcome. Now, what are the other possible outcomes? Well, there's really only one at this stage, and that is if in the few days that are left, because now they're trying to get the readings, the second and third readings on Monday. First, it has to go through committees, but basically it's the coalition are pressing very hard to try and get it through on Monday. So that leaves the opposition, chiefly Benjamin Netanyahu, leader of the opposition, 5 days to try and cobble together 61 votes for an alternate government. Now, we've spoken about that in the past, that for law of disperse of the Knesset, you just need a majority, especially in the first readings, but to declare an alternate government, you need 61 signatures, or you need 61 votes, and you need to put up an alternative government. Interesting, the last few minutes, I just saw that that Netanyahu did put through a no confidence bill, which names an alternative government, obviously with him as prime minister. All the ministers at this point are named as Likun ministers, but the legal authorities have said that they can change all of those names up until the last minute. So basically, they've left that as a place marker in the hope that in the next 5 days, they can get to that 61. Now, will they get to that 61? I'd have to say that the chances are very slim. And that's because even if, and it seems like the only ones who are possibly going to move across at the moment, as we said, the opposition is 53. With Orbach, let's say that's 54. That leaves another 5 members of Yamina. Now, there are those who have already come out and said that they would have no problem moving across and sitting under Netanyahu to avert another round of elections. Shirley Pinto has said so. Even Ayelet Shaked has said so. The Director General of the Yamina Party, Stella Weinstein, has said that the party in general would have no problem, or at least that was her opinion on the matter. But let's just say, even if the remaining members of Yamina, and that would obviously have to include Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, then that would only mean 59. That means they would need another 2 votes. Now, the most likely other votes, one would think, is Gideon Saar's party. Gideon Saar's party at this point, Gideon Saar has said so, and many other members of the party have said that there is no chance that they will sit under Netanyahu. The other possible option is Benny Gantz, but as we know, Benny Gantz has been bitten once, and twice he's definitely shy. And he said Netanyahu's political credit, as far as he's concerned, has long since run out. So if Saar and if Gantz and all the members of their party are true to what's being said, then Netanyahu does not have a 61. The person leading these negotiations is Moshe Gafni of the ultra-Orthodox United Torah Judaism Party, spending every single minute, whether it's with Shaked, Gantz, or Saar. I would say the chances are slim because it does seem that they just are not the numbers. It's not impossible, and it could be on Monday we'll have, instead of a law to disperse the Knesset, possibly an alternate government. That remains a possibility. Now, both sides, it seems, to a certain extent, are wanting to speed the process up, but also the opposition has an interest in slowing it down, maybe to give another day for these negotiations to bring across another few rebels on top of what they think that they can already bring. Interestingly enough, the law to disperse the Knesset then goes to the Knesset committee. And the head of the Knesset committee is none other than Nir Orbach, the hero or the villain of the day, depending on where you sit. At the moment, he is certainly the biggest loser from this whole week, because he had a lot of leverage, because he was going to be the extra vote that brings down the government. Now, bringing down the government, as I said, you need 61, and the Joint Arab List would have voted for a dispersal of Knesset. And they did vote for dispersal of Knesset law, but they will not vote for a no confidence vote. So the numbers, Nir Orbach had very much, he was going to be that person who would break the deadlock and become the 61st finger in the air, as it were, for the opposition to ensure a dispersal of Knesset. When Lapid and Bennett decided to jump first, Orbach lost his leverage, and Likud were very quick in saying that we owe him nothing, we agreed nothing, so he gets nothing. Now, Orbach does have another card or two, possibly, because he is the head, as I said, of the Knesset committee, which has to decide if it's going to debate the dispersal of Knesset law, because obviously, like any legislatures, after each reading, in theory, it goes back to committee to be discussed. Now, he can also decide the pace of the law. As I said, it's possible, although he probably won't get too much leeway, that he could delay the vote for a day or two, possibly, but that could be crucial in these negotiations by Netanyahu's camp to get to that hallowed 61 for the no confidence vote. As I said, it's still unlikely, but it's not impossible. So if there is a law of dispersal passed through its second and third readings on Monday, then certainly Nir Orbach will come out the loser, because he won't really have a place in Yamina, and he won't really have a place in Likud or its allies. Now, alongside, one would think that with the dispersal of Knesset law coming up, there's no other real issues to get through. But both sides are trying to push through last-minute issues before the Knesset disperses, because obviously when it disperses, there can be no more legislating. The coalition, or at least major elements in the coalition, are trying to pass through at the last minute. One of its flagship issues, or at least many of the parties' flagship issues, is to pass a law which ensures that no member of Knesset under indictment can form a government. Now, obviously, as we know, that's crucial, because the only person at the moment, well, not the only person, but the most prominent person under indictment in the Knesset is Benjamin Netanyahu. If that law were to pass, that would invalidate him, not just forming a government in this Knesset, but in the next one. That is something which the opposition are, to a certain extent, worried about, but to a certain extent not. And why not? Because if in the next elections they get their 61, then they can just overturn it. It wouldn't be a basic law, which has a quasi-constitutional purpose, and it could also be quashed by the Supreme Court. So there is a certain amount of concern, but not too much. There are other laws that they want to try and get through, for example, to give compensation to freelance workers, which is something which has been promised and actually has gone through one reading, so it's on the verge of being legislated. And the coalition is expressing outrage, at least publicly, that the opposition will not pass such a seemingly consensus issue. That there's a few other laws that are in the final stages of legislation, which they're trying to pass through, which again they consider consensus, but the opposition is saying that we will pass all of these laws for you on one condition: you give back Amichai Shikli, that, if we remember, the original renegade Yamina MK, who was declared a deserter and will not be able to run in the next elections on an existing list. They're trying to overturn that, and they're saying that will be our quid pro quo. Now, I think that's a bit of a red herring. They're trying to basically delay everything, because to the best of my understanding and my reading, it'd be far more beneficial for Netanyahu to have Amichai Shikli run on a separate list. Perhaps he could attract the right-wing voters who respect Amichai Shikli and what he's done over the last year, but couldn't vote for Likud and Benjamin Netanyahu. According to polls, though, however, he is expected to get no more than 2% if he was to run his own party, and that is well below the threshold needed to get into Knesset. Obviously, a lot of things can change in the future, but at the moment, Shikli isn't really a major force, but obviously that could change, especially if he's given a big war chest and perhaps some prominent figures to stand alongside him. Those are basically the major issues. One other talking point, which a lot of people are now speculating about, is if the law, the dispersal law does go through on Monday, what does that mean for Naftali Bennett? Because according to coalition agreement, according to the press statements, Bennett is going to hand over the premiership to Yair Lapid, and he will then become alternate prime minister, which basically is a meaningless title, pretty much, especially as it's already passed, and a minister in charge of Iran issues. Now, that's really not that much, obviously, and the question is whether they'll have any teeth. But now a lot of speculation is that Naftali Bennett will just resign, even take a time out, from politics. Certainly, that would be probably the best strategy for him. from going from prime minister for a year to being pretty much irrelevant into the background, fade into the background, and this party really not doing well, perhaps it would be a good opportunity to sort of fade into the background now, knowing that in Israel, comebacks happen all the time. Netanyahu, floundered in the polls, and then he came back. Same Barak, same Sharon in his time, Rabin. I mean, the list is endless. Tzipi Livni made several comebacks. Shimon Peres made several comebacks. So that would probably be the best strategically. Moving forward a little bit onto the elections, what we can see also is that according to all polls, no side will get that necessary 61. So it could be, even when we go to this fifth round of elections, there could be necessary for a sixth, maybe even a seventh. But what we do know as well is this is going to be an extremely divisive elections. It's going to be, again, focused on personalities, away from the issues, as it has been, unfortunately, for a number of years. And what we already see is a sort of taste of what the two sides are going to bring to the table. We heard this week, again, as he has done throughout this tenure, Netanyahu, the opposition leader, the head of the Likud party, is very much trying to frame himself as the savior of the country, that the government and all the composite parts of it were selling the country to the Islamist party, to the Arabs, to Mansour Abbas, and even Ahmed Tibi on the Joint Arab List. So he will see himself as the savior, and he'll try and make that case before the Israelis. It's either me or the Islamist movement. That is the case that he'll probably make over the next few months if we do go to elections. On the other side, Yair Lapid came out today with a very interesting comment. He said, for us, this isn't about Netanyahu. It's about Itamar Ben-Gvir, one of the leaders, the leader of Otzma Yehudit, which is a part of the National Religious Party, who's seen as probably the most, well, not probably, as the most extreme member of Knesset. And Yair Lapid said, if you vote for the other side, if the current opposition becomes the government, then Itamar Ben-Gvir will be a minister and he'll be a major player. And can we allow such an extremist to be part of our government? So we already see the lines that are going to be drawn by either side. It's going to be divisive. It's going to be personal. It's going to be vicious because there is so much at stake. The numbers really it comes down to the numbers at the end of the day. The polls are showing that the opposition bloc is not a million miles away from the 61. I certainly, as I've said many times the last 2 years, you don't bet against Bibi. If his bloc at the moment is getting 58, 59, 60, he is a very good campaigner, so I wouldn't rule him out getting those extra few seats. But if we do go to elections, there are a lot of factors ahead. Who will be the parties? Who will be the new personalities? Will there be any new parties? What will be the issues? What's going to happen? Will the economy tank more? Will there be a security situation, et cetera, et cetera? So until we know all these factors, it's going to be very, very difficult to know exactly who stands the best chance. But at this point in time, it's been a very good week for the opposition. Netanyahu is certainly pleased with himself. If he can get that 61st vote, which, as I said at the beginning, is extremely unlikely, it would be an even better week for him. But I think at this point, he'll be satisfied with the dispersal of Knesset, going to elections probably at the beginning of November, and knowing that he stands a relatively good chance of returning to the prime ministership at some point by the end of the year or early next year. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you so much. First question we have is from Norman. What is the probability that the Likud will realize that a right-wing government could be formed if they had a leader other than Netanyahu? And David Edmond follows up, any chance Netanyahu can be replaced as the leader of the Likud?
At this point, no. To the second question, he can't be replaced. Likud will have to hold primaries before elections. I would say that there's very little chance, even in primaries, of him being replaced because the opposition to him is a little bit splintered. There's Nir Barkat, there's Israel Katz, there is, Yuli Edelstein, even Miri Regev will throw her hat in the ring, which means that the opposition will be splintered. Even if they did rally around one person, let's say the most popular, Nir Barkat, which is highly unlikely because he's not liked by his competitors, it's unlikely he will get the necessary majority over Netanyahu. It is clear that if Netanyahu was not to be the prime minister of an alternate government, then they would find it much easier to bring across people like Gideon Saar, perhaps even Benny Gantz. And it's sort of ironic that the right-wing opposition has been saying for over a year that it would do anything, absolutely everything, to bring down this government. Well, there is one way that they could have brought this government down even in the first month, and that would have been if Netanyahu would have stepped aside. Now, Netanyahu supporters would have said, well, that's undemocratic. He is the elected leader of our party, so there's no basis for that. But there are those who say if the right wing really wanted to be in power, even without going to elections, then that would be the one step that they would need to do. It's not going to happen. I believe that Netanyahu, in all likelihood, will be leading the Likud into the upcoming elections.
Thank you. Murray Feldman asks, can Netanyahu form a majority with Ram and Meretz added?
Netanyahu has said that he will never allow Ram to be part of it. He wouldn't have Meretz. These are the last two parties. He won't even be he won't be negotiating with Ram. He won't be negotiating with Meretz. He won't be negotiating with Yesh Atid or the Labour Party, and probably not Yisrael Beitenu, anyone in Yisrael Beitenu. The only three parties or members of three parties that there's outreach to at this point are Yamina, Gideon Saar's New Hope, and Benny Gantz's Blue and White Party. Certainly, Ram are off the table. Netanyahu and his allies have gone to the media and say that this is the biggest problem, even though we know that Likud and Netanyahu were courting Ram before even this government was thought about. And they were the first ones who sort of, kosherized, as it were, Ram and made them possible members of a coalition. But they've very much been able to get this message out that Ram is not a legitimate partner. So there's no chance Ram will come, and there's no chance Meretz will come, and there's no chance even Netanyahu would even be approaching anyone in Meretz at this point.
Thank you for clearing that up. Eric asks, many left parties are concerned about making a minimum threshold. So which left parties do you see joining together to make that?
At the moment, none. There is talk of Meretz and Labour joining together, but I don't see it happening at this point. There are differences. It's not just, everyone's on the left. There are major differences between Labour and Meretz. The Ram Party, another party which is close to the threshold, the only possible alliance they could make is by possibly returning to the joint list. But it does seem that Mansour Abbas has crossed the Rubicon. He is taking a different path from the other Arab parties who said, who will not join any government, and they will not be asked to join any government. Ram has said that they would like to continue working with the government, whichever one comes next, and they see themselves as legitimate interlocutors in forming a coalition, whatever that may be. Obviously, the other side may have, depending who it is, may have their own say on it. But Ram, ideologically at this point, as far as they see sort of cooperation with the government, stands very, very differently from the remaining members of the joint list. So I don't see at this point any mergers. But again, we're just at the beginning of, the campaign. If the Knesset does disperse on Monday or at some point next week, so anything's out there. There's also the name that's been bandied around is Gadi Eisenkot, the former chief of staff of the IDF. He is supposed to be the big name that's possibly entering politics, but at the moment, probably he's going to choose between Yesh Atid and Blue and White.
Thank you. Carrie Hillebrand asks, do you see a realistic chance that the present incarnation of Labour and or Meretz passing the threshold?
Well, Labour are, according to no poll that I've seen, are close to the threshold. They're pretty safe. Meretz are definitely, as they were in the last elections, are definitely near that threshold. But probably what will happen is what happened last time is they will make a last-minute plea to their voters, which may be swayed to vote for larger parties to save Meretz. That's what did it last time, to save them. And by the way, Labour as well. Labour were close to the threshold, but in the end actually did very well. I believe, I think they got 8 or 9 seats. So they passed very comfortably. So I think both of their parties know that there's a certain base there who, if they make the right plea, they have the right campaign at the right time, then I think that they will pass the threshold. The one that's probably the closest the most worried about passing the threshold is New Hope, is Gideon Saar's New Hope. That's the one that's probably most frequently polling just below the threshold. So there is talk about perhaps New Hope and Yamina Party joining together, or maybe some other constellation, because at the moment, Gideon Saar is probably has to be the most worried for his political future.
Thank you. David Levine asks, what, if any, are the ramifications of the fall of this government for Israel's relationship with the U.S.?
Well, according to all reports, President Biden is still going to arrive in Israel in July. There was a call by Secretary Blinken to Yair Lapid, who would be the incoming prime minister, and Naftali Bennett, who would be the outgoing prime minister, and expressing satisfaction with the Israel democratic process. And the line that comes out in these types of things is, the relationship is bigger than any one particular personality, and there are so many important things to discuss that the meetings will go on anyway, especially because of the issue of Iran, of the issue of what's going on in the region, of the issue of the oil and gas that's in the region. We can see, we were originally going to talk more about this, about regional events that are happening. We saw remarkably Saudi leaders in Turkey. As you remember a couple of years ago with the death or the murder of the reporter Khashoggi, that such a scene as we saw today in Ankara, just seemed out of the question. But the region is changing very, very rapidly, and Biden is coming to take advantage of that, and also because of the crises which are happening in the world. And his trip to Israel is already on the schedule, and that's not going to change.
Speaking of Turkey, Barak Korkmaz asks, where are the Turkish-Israeli relations heading? Could they be strategic partners in the future?
Well, they're definitely improving. And as we've seen the last few weeks with reports of Iranian hit squads trying to target any Israeli tourists, not just reports, we know this is happening. Turkey has been pretty good. It's working very closely with Israeli intelligence and security officials to stop and prevent and even arrest some of these Iranian hit squads. And apparently reports or even of Turkish mercenaries who are helping them. We hear reports of Israelis who are minutes away from being killed, of Israelis being whipped from a tour of a market and taken straight to the airport without returning to their hotels, because that's where Iranian agents were waiting for them. So the Turks are playing a very important role. And Yair Lapid is going to Ankara tomorrow, not just to thank Turkey for this, but also to talk about strengthened ties, talk about also the issue of gas, because Turkey don't want to be left out with what's happening with Israel and Egypt, and Israel and the Eastern Mediterranean countries, Greece and Cyprus, and Israel's export of gas to Europe. Turkey very much wants to be part of that. Turkey's done a bit of a about face in the region, and they're now moving back towards the Saudis, back towards Israel. The relationships are certainly not warm at this point, but they're certainly moved away from the very chilly sort of atmosphere that even a year ago. So Israel and Turkey are certainly not back to where they were originally, but certainly things are moving in the right direction.
That's good to hear. Reuven Hawk asks, any indication who will become foreign minister if the government disperses? Will Lapid retain that position?
That's a good question. I think it was Gideon Saar who was supposed to, according to the coalition agreement, I believe it was Gideon Saar who was supposed to be foreign minister, if I remember correctly. Was that Ayala Shiged? I think it was Gideon Saar. There hasn't been much talk about that, only really at the prime minister level. But I guess a lot would depend. Gideon Saar may feel that he still has work to do in the Justice Ministry, so he may want to remain there. It could be Yair Lapid will retain that as well. Don't forget, under Israeli law, during the campaign period, large significant decisions cannot be made unless there can be a justification that it's emergency. In fact, a big issue is coming up now because the defense minister Benny Gantz wants to appoint a new chief of staff because the current incumbent's tenure is running out very soon. And the attorney general has come out and said that unless Benny Gantz can show that there is an absolute necessity to do it at this point, he will not grant that right. So it's possible that Benny Gantz is going to try and get it in before the dispersal of the Knesset. That's been talked about. But if not, then there could be a fight whether he is able to get through whoever in the end he decides. But certainly one thing is certain is once the dispersal of the Knesset has been passed, a lot of the ministers are prevented from making big decisions. So a lot of their work is, they're hampered. They can't do a lot of their work. So perhaps some of the ministers will feel that perhaps they just want to stay where they are and continue what they've done, because obviously you can continue initiatives and things that you've done rather than move to a position which will kind of to a certain extent become a lame duck. So we'll have to wait and see once the dispersal of Knesset law comes in. Once Lapid, if that happens, is installed as prime minister, we'll have to see if there is a government shuffle and who gets what.
All right. Thank you so much. We've come to the close of our webinar and podcast. Ashley, thank you again for taking time to update us this week. For our viewers and listeners, please join us Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern for a webinar with Ephraim Imbar discussing a renewed Iran deal and Israel's options. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.